Sometimes the choices we make to protect our dreams end up haunting us forever. And sometimes, those we left behind come back into our lives when we least expect it. Claudia Raines was a successful tech CEO who thought she had left her past behind. One rainy night after a business dinner, she saw 3 men attacking a homeless person near the subway station. When she stepped in to help, she discovered something that would change everything. The homeless man was Nathan, her former business partner and the love of her life from years ago. She had walked away from him when his mental health struggles threatened her rising career. Now, face to face with the man she abandoned, Claudia realized that success might have cost her more than she ever imagined. What really happened the night she chose her career over love? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 30th floor of the glass tower offered a view that most people would kill for. Seattle stretched out below like a glittering circuit board, the Space Needle standing sentinel over Elliott Bay, while ferries traced white lines across dark water. Claudia Raines stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the city pulse with evening life, but feeling none of its energy. At 37, she had everything she'd once dreamed of. The corner office came with mahogany furniture that cost more than most people's cars, original artwork that whispered of sophistication, and a view that reminded her daily of how far she'd climbed. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who looked the part: sharp blazer, perfectly styled auburn hair, and the kind of confident posture that commanded respect in boardrooms. But behind the polished exterior, Claudia felt a familiar emptiness that success couldn't seem to fill. "Miss Raines?" Maya Chen's voice cut through her reverie. Her assistant stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, looking as composed as always despite the late hour. Maya had been with her for 3 years, and Claudia trusted her more than anyone else in her life, which wasn't saying much, considering how carefully Claudia guarded her trust. "The car is waiting downstairs. Mr. Chun's dinner reservation is at 8:30. Robert Chun wasn't related to Maya, despite sharing a last name, a coincidence that had amused them both when Maya first started working for Claudia. Robert was the kind of investor who could make or break a tech company with a single phone call. Tonight's dinner was crucial. Claudia's company, Nexus Technologies, was poised for its next round of funding, and Robert held the keys to venture capital doors that could transform her already successful business into something truly extraordinary. "Thank you, Maya. You should head home. It's been a long day." Maya hesitated at the threshold. "Are you sure you're ready for this dinner? You seem—" "I'm fine." The words came out sharper than Claudia intended. She softened her tone. "I'm just focused. This deal could change everything for us." After Maya left, Claudia gathered her things slowly, her eyes drifting to the framed photograph on her desk. It was a professional shot taken for the company website, her alone, looking confident and successful against a backdrop of Seattle's skyline. No family photos cluttered her desk. No personal mementos spoke of a life beyond these walls. Even her penthouse apartment, with its minimalist design and expensive furniture, felt more like a showroom than a home. The drive to the restaurant gave her time to review her strategy. Robert Chen was known for his tough questions and his ability to see through corporate spin. But Claudia had built her reputation on being prepared for anything. Nexus Technologies specialized in data analytics software that helped companies optimize their operations. It was solid, profitable work that had earned her respect in the tech community and a personal net worth that would have seemed impossible to the girl who'd grown up in a small apartment above her grandmother's bakery in Tacoma. The memory of her grandmother's hands, flour-dusted and gentle, flickered through her mind as the car navigated evening traffic. Elena Raines had raised Claudia after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. The bakery had been their world, warm, fragrant with bread and pastries, filled with neighbors who knew each other's names and stories. Elena had worked 16-hour days to keep the business running and put Claudia through school, never complaining, never asking for anything except that Claudia work hard and make something of herself. Make sure you can take care of yourself. Mia, Elena had said during Claudia's senior year of high school, don't depend on anyone else for your security. People leave, but your own strength stays with you. It was advice that had shaped every decision Claudia made afterward. She'd earned a full scholarship to the University of Washington, studying computer science with a focus that impressed her professors. While other students partied or dated, Claudia worked part-time jobs and maintained perfect grades. She had a plan, and she wasn't going to let anything derail it. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place where deals were made under stated elegance. Private booths and a wine list that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Robert Chun was already seated when she arrived, checking his phone with the focused attention of someone whose time was measured in millions of dollars. Claudia. He stood to greet her, his handshake firm and brief. You look well. Success suits you. The dinner unfolded exactly as she'd expected. Robert asked probing questions about market projections, competitive analysis, and scalability. Claudia answered each one with the precision of someone who'd lived and breathed her business for the past 5 years. She felt the familiar rush of being in control, of knowing she was good at what she did. I have to say, I'm impressed, Robert said as they finished their entrees. Your growth trajectory is exactly what we look for in our portfolio companies. But I do have one concern. Claudia kept her expression neutral. What's that? Your company. History shows some gaps. There was another co-founder listed in your initial incorporation documents, but he seems to have disappeared from all records about 2 years in. Nathan Morrison. What happened there? The question hit her like cold water. She'd been expecting it eventually. Investors always did their due diligence, but she thought she'd had more time to prepare a response that wouldn't raise additional questions. Nathan and I had different visions for the company's direction. She said carefully. He decided to pursue other opportunities. Robert nodded, but his eyes remained sharp. And the patents filed around that time, those were collaborative work? The core innovations were mine. Nathan contributed to early development, but the breakthrough technologies that form our current platform came after his departure. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The weight of that omission sat heavy in her chest as they discussed terms and timelines. By the time dinner ended, Claudia had secured Robert's commitment to move forward with due diligence, but the conversation about Nathan had left her unsettled in a way she couldn't shake. The rain had started while they were inside, turning Seattle's streets into rivers of reflected neon. Claudia's driver was waiting, but she found herself wanting to walk despite the weather. She needed air, needed movement, needed something to quiet the restless energy that Robert's questions had stirred. Up? I'll take the subway, she told her driver. I need to clear my head. The decision was impulsive, unlike her usual careful planning. But as she walked toward the station, her heels clicking against wet pavement, Claudia felt something she rarely allowed herself to experience: uncertainty. The success she'd built, the life she'd crafted so carefully, suddenly felt fragile in a way that both frightened and confused her. She thought about Nathan as she descended into the subway station, something she'd trained herself not to do for years. His laugh, warm and genuine. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about their shared vision for the future. The quiet strength he'd shown during their early struggles to get the company off the ground. And then, inevitably, she thought about the last time she'd seen him broken, desperate, and looking at her with a mixture of love and betrayal that still haunted her dreams. Claudia shook her head, pushing the memories away as she had countless times before. She'd made her choice. She'd built something meaningful and successful. She couldn't change the past, and she wouldn't let it undermine the future she'd worked so hard to create. The subway platform was nearly empty, the late hour and rain keeping most commuters away. Claudia checked her phone, scrolling through emails that couldn't wait until morning, losing herself in the familiar comfort of work. She was so absorbed in her screen that she almost missed the sound of shouting from the entrance above. The voices above grew louder, more aggressive. Claudia looked up from her phone, frowning at the disturbance. 3 men's voices, slurred with alcohol and something else, the sound of someone in pain. Her first instinct was to stay put, to let someone else handle whatever was happening. But a grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. When someone needs help, Mia, you help. That's what decent people do. Against her better judgment, Claudia climbed the stairs back to street level. The scene that greeted her made her stomach clench with anger. 3 men in their 20s, probably college students from the nearby university, had cornered a homeless man near the station entrance. They were shoving him back and forth between them like a cruel game, laughing as he stumbled and tried to protect a battered backpack clutched against his chest. "Come on, crazy man, dance for us," one of them shouted, giving the homeless man another shove that sent him sprawling onto the wet pavement. "Please," the man on the ground said, his voice barely audible above the rain. "I'm not bothering anyone. Just let me be." The sound of that voice stopped Claudia's heart. Soft, educated, with just a hint of the southern accent he'd never quite lost despite years in Seattle. She knew that voice better than her own. "Hey," she called out, stepping into the circle of streetlight. "Leave him alone." The 3 men turned toward her, taking in her expensive clothes and authoritative bearing. The leader, a blonde kid with the kind of confidence that came from never facing real consequences, sneered at her. "Mind your own business, lady. We're just having some fun with the local entertainment." "Fun?" Claudia's voice carried the steel that had silenced boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. "You're assaulting someone who can't defend himself. That's not fun. That's criminal." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." The threat was enough. The 3 men exchanged glances, suddenly aware that their harmless fun could have real consequences. They backed away, muttering curses and complaints about uptight businesswomen who couldn't take a joke. "This isn't over, crazy man," the leader called back as they retreated into the night. Claudia watched them disappear around the corner before turning her attention to the figure still crouched on the ground. He was trying to get to his feet, moving with the careful, pained motions of someone whose body had endured too much. "Are you hurt?" she asked, reaching out instinctively to help him up. "Do you need medical attention?" Her hand touched his shoulder, and he looked up at her for the first time. The face that met hers was weathered by 7 years of hard living, thinner than she remembered, marked by lines of pain and exhaustion that hadn't been there before. His dark hair was longer now, streaked with premature gray, and his clothes were layered against the cold, worn jacket, faded jeans with careful patches, boots that had seen better years. But the eyes were unmistakably his, deep brown, intelligent, and filled with a recognition that mirrored her own shock. "Nathan?" The name escaped her lips in a whisper. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact second when disbelief gave way to something more complex. A mixture of pain, embarrassment, and a flash of the old warmth that used to make her feel like the most important person in the world. "Hello, Claudia." His voice was careful, controlled. "You look," he gestured vaguely at her designer clothes, her perfect hair that was only now starting to wilt in the rain. "You look successful." The word hung between them like an accusation. Claudia felt the careful walls she'd built around her emotions begin to crack. This wasn't how she'd imagined seeing Nathan again, not that she'd allowed herself to imagine it often. In her rare, unguarded moments, she pictured him healthy and thriving somewhere far from Seattle, maybe teaching at a university or working for some tech company that appreciated his brilliant unconventional mind. She hadn't pictured him like this. Nathan, what? She stopped, realizing how the question would sound. What happened to you? How did you end up here? Why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't I try to find you? I should go, he said, shouldering his backpack and starting to move away from her. Thank you for helping with those guys. You didn't have to do that. Wait. She caught his arm, feeling how thin he'd become under the layers of clothes. Please don't go. Not yet. You stopped but didn't turn around. Why? So you can feel better. About yourself? So you can add helped homeless person to your list of good deeds for the year? The bitterness in his voice cut deeper than any boardroom criticism ever had. But underneath it, she heard something else hurt that ran so deep. It had calcified into protective anger. That's not. She took a breath, trying to find words that wouldn't sound patronizing or self-serving. I've wondered about you. Over the years, I've wondered if you were okay. Nathan finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was almost unbearable. Have you? Really? Because it would have been pretty easy to find out. I was in the same city, using the same name. But I guess you were too busy building your empire to look back. Each word was precise, delivered without rage but with the kind of weary disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. Claudia felt tears threatening for the first time in years, not the careful, strategic tears she'd learned to summon in negotiations, but the raw, uncontrolled emotion she'd spent decades learning to suppress. You're right, she said quietly. I should have looked for you. You should have done a lot of things. Nathan adjusted his backpack, the movement revealing how carefully he carried himself, as if pain was a constant companion. But you made your choice. You got what you wanted. He started walking again, heading toward the darker part of the street where the glow of the subway entrance didn't reach. Claudia watched him go, paralyzed by the weight of 7 years' worth of guilt and regret crashing down on her all at once. Then, without thinking, she called after him. Nathan, wait, please. Just let me buy you coffee or food. Something. He paused again, his shoulders tensing. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost missed it over the sound of the rain. I'm not your charity case, Claudia. I know. That? I know you're not. She stepped closer, her expensive heels splashing through puddles she wouldn't normally notice. But I'd like to talk to you, if you're willing. Just talk. For a long moment, Nathan stood motionless in the rain, and Claudia held her breath. She could see him wrestling with something, pride, maybe, or old wounds that hadn't healed properly. When he finally turned around, his expression was unreadable. There's a diner 6 blocks from here, Alana's place. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Named after someone you used to know. The owner doesn't mind if people like me sit for a while, as long as we order something. Claudia's heart clenched at the mention of her grandmother's name. Elena had been gone for 3 years now, but Nathan had loved her like his own family. During the brief time they'd all been together. Okay, she said. I'd like that. As they walked through the rain-slicked streets, Claudia found herself studying Nathan from the corner of her eye. The way he moved with purpose despite his obvious fatigue. The careful way he scanned their surroundings, alert to dangers she'd never had to consider. The weathered notebook that peeked out from his jacket pocket, its pages swollen with moisture. And constant handling. 7 years. 7 years since she'd seen the man she'd once thought she might spend her life with. 7 years since she'd made the choice that had brought her everything she'd thought she wanted and cost her everything she hadn't known she needed. Now, walking beside him through the streets of the city where they'd once dreamed of changing the world together, Claudia realized that success was a much lonelier victory than she'd ever imagined. Alana's place was exactly the kind of diner that was disappearing from Seattle-worn vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting that had seen better decades, and the smell of coffee that had been brewing since morning. The woman behind the counter was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of face that had seen enough of life to judge people by their actions, rather than their appearances. "Nathan," she called out as they entered, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "You're later than usual tonight." I was starting to worry. "Sorry, Elena. Had some trouble at the station." Nathan gestured toward Claudia. "This is a friend. From before." Elena's eyes took in Claudia's expensive clothes and perfectly styled hair, but her expression remained neutral. She'd clearly learned not to make assumptions about the people Nathan brought around. "Booth in the back is open," Elena said. "Coffee's fresh." They settled into a corner booth, the red vinyl cracked but clean. Claudia found herself studying the one Formica table, unsure how to begin a conversation that felt impossible. What did you say to someone you loved and abandoned? How did you bridge 7 years of silence with small talk? Nathan solved the problem by ordering first. "Coffee. Black, and the turkey sandwich, if you don't mind." "Of course, honey." Elena turned to Claudia, her expression slightly cooler. "And for you? Just coffee, please. Black." Claudia couldn't imagine eating anything with her stomach twisted in knots. After Elena left, they sat in silence for a moment. The diner was nearly empty, just an elderly man reading a newspaper at the counter, and a young couple sharing pie in a booth near the window. The normalcy of it all felt surreal given the weight of their situation. "So," Nathan said finally, his hands wrapped around the coffee mug Elena had brought him. "Nexus Technologies. Pretty impressive." Claudia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You know about my company?" "I'm homeless, not dead." There was no malice in his voice, just a tired amusement. "I still read the business section when I can get my hands on a newspaper." Rising tech star Claudia Raines has made quite a name for herself. The way he said it, factual, almost proud, somehow made her feel worse than if he'd been angry. She'd prepared herself for accusations, recriminations, demands for explanations. She hadn't prepared for this careful politeness, this treatment of her success as something that had nothing to do with him. "Nathan, you don't have to explain anything to me." He took a sip of his coffee, and she noticed that his hands were steady despite everything. "You built something." That was always the plan, right? Build something that matters. "But it was supposed to be something we built together," she thought, but couldn't say. "Where are you staying?" she asked instead, then immediately regretted the question. It was exactly the kind of thing someone with a home asked someone without one, loaded with assumptions and pity, here and there. Nathan's response was matter-of-fact. "There's a shelter about 10 blocks from here that has decent security. Sometimes I can get a bed there. Sometimes I sleep in the park when the weather's okay. There's a whole community of us people who figured out how to survive." The casual way he described homelessness, as if it were just another life skill he'd had to learn, broke something inside Claudia's chest. This was Nathan, the man who used to stay up all night coding because he was excited about solving a problem. The man who had never met a technical challenge he couldn't turn into an elegant solution. The man who had believed, with absolute certainty, that technology could make the world better. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long what?" "How long have you been?" She gestured vaguely, unable to say the word. "Homeless?" Nathan finished for her. "About 5 years. Maybe 6. Time gets funny when you're not keeping a calendar." 5 years. The number hit her like a physical blow. 5 years meant he'd been living on the streets while she was celebrating her company's first million in revenue. 5 years meant he'd been struggling to find a place to sleep while she was buying her penthouse apartment. 5 years meant, what happened? The question escaped before she could stop it. "I mean, after I left for that investor meeting. What happened to you?" Nathan was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Elena brought his sandwich and refilled their coffee. the mundane interruption feeling strange given the gravity of their conversation. "You really want to know?" he asked finally. Claudia nodded, even though part of her was terrified of the answer. Nathan took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost clinical, as if he were describing something that had happened to someone else. "I had what the doctors call a psychotic break. Complete disconnect from reality. I was convinced that our code was sending messages to aliens, that the government was monitoring our every keystroke, that you were part of some conspiracy to steal my thoughts." He smiled grimly. "Paranoid delusions, they called it. Classic bipolar disorder with psychotic features." Claudia's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. She remembered that night, the way Nathan had been acting strange for weeks, talking about things that didn't make sense, staying awake for days at a time, convinced that every setback was part of some larger plot against them. She'd thought he was just stressed about the business. She'd thought it would pass. "The night you left for that meeting," Nathan continued, "I ended up at the hospital. Voluntary commitment, which was probably the smartest thing I did that whole month. They kept me for 2 weeks, got me stabilized on medication, helped me understand what was happening to me. Why didn't you call me?" The words came out more accusatory than she'd intended. "Why didn't you tell me you were in the hospital?" Nathan looked at her with something that might have been pity. "I did call you, Claudia. 3 times. You never answered. You never called back." The memory hit her like cold water. She had seen his calls late at night, early in the morning, always when she was in meetings or dealing with the chaos that had followed the investor presentation. She'd assumed he was having another episode, calling to rant about conspiracies or to beg her to come back to the failing company. She'd been so angry, so hurt by what she saw as his abandonment of their shared dream, that she'd turned off her phone and let Maya screen her calls. She'd never even listened to the voicemails. "Oh, God." The words came out as barely a whisper. "Nathan, I didn't know. You didn't want to know." There was no anger in his voice, which somehow made it worse. "And I don't blame you for that. I wasn't exactly rational company in those days." Elena appeared beside their table, her experienced eyes taking in Claudia's obvious distress. "Everything okay over here?" "We're fine," Nathan said quickly. "Just catching up on old times." Elena nodded but lingered for a moment, clearly protective of Nathan in a way that spoke to a longer relationship than just server and customer. Finally, she moved away, but Claudia noticed she kept glancing back at their table. "She takes care of you," Claudia observed. "Elena's good people. Lots of folks around here are, once you get past the assumptions about what homeless people are. Like," Nathan finished his sandwich and pushed the plate away. "She lets me wash dishes sometimes when they're short-staffed. Pays in food and doesn't ask questions about my employment history." There was dignity in the way he talked about his situation, a refusal to be ashamed of the life he'd been forced to build. It reminded Claudia of why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place, his ability to find solutions, to adapt, to maintain his essential decency, even when circumstances tried to strip it away. "Nathan," she began, then stopped. What could she say? That she was sorry? That she'd made a mistake? That she built her entire successful life on the foundation of abandoning him when he needed her most? All of those things were true, but they felt inadequate in the face of what he'd endured. "You don't have to say anything," he said, reading her struggle. "We were kids, basically. We thought we knew how to handle anything the world threw at us. We were wrong, but I was supposed to love you," she thought. "I was supposed to stay and figure it out with you." Instead, she'd run toward the safety of a sure thing, leaving him to face his crisis alone. The rain had stopped while they talked, but the silence between them felt heavier than the storm had been. Claudia watched Nathan's hands as he held his coffee mug still graceful despite the calluses and weathering. Still the hands that had once traced code across whiteboards like poetry. "Do you remember how we met?" she asked, needing to anchor herself in a time when things between them had been simple. Nathan's mouth curved in the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. Computer Science 301, Professor Williams' Advanced Algorithms class. You sat in the front row and asked questions that made half the class hate you. I was serious about learning. You were terrifying. His eyes softened with the memory. I spent 3 weeks working up the courage to ask if you wanted to study together. Claudia found herself smiling too, remembering that awkward junior year version of Nathan, brilliant but shy, the kind of student who understood complex theories but stumbled over simple social interactions. She'd been drawn to his mind first, the way he could see patterns and solutions that escaped everyone else, including their professors. "You brought me coffee and a stack of programming manuals from the library," she said. "Told me you thought we could help each other. Best decision I ever made." The words slipped out before Nathan seemed to realize he'd said them, and the smile faded from his face. At the time, anyway, they'd been inseparable after that first study session. Partners in every class project, spending hours in the computer lab working on code that pushed the boundaries of what their outdated university equipment could handle. Claudia had been focused on building practical applications, things that could solve real-world problems and maybe make some money along the way. Nathan had been more interested in elegant solutions, code that was beautiful in its simplicity and efficiency. "You saved me from becoming just another corporate drone," Claudia said. "All those late nights talking about what technology could really do, how we could build something that mattered. Yeah, well, look how that turned out." Nathan's voice carried a bitterness that made her flinch. "Nathan, no, it's okay. I'm not bitter about the business stuff. Not really." He leaned back in the booth, studying her face with the kind of careful attention that had always made her feel seen in a way that was both thrilling and uncomfortable. "But I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if we'd kept it simple. If we just stayed friends who happened to be good at coding together. Instead of falling in love," he meant. Instead of tangling their personal relationship with their professional partnership until it became impossible to separate the two. Claudia remembered the exact moment when friendship had shifted into something deeper. It had been during finals week of their senior year, both of them exhausted from days of coding and too much caffeine. Nathan had fallen asleep at his keyboard, and she'd found herself watching him sleep, noticing the way his hair fell across his forehead, the peaceful expression that replaced his usual intensity. When he'd woken up and caught her staring, neither of them had looked away. "I don't regret falling in love with you," she said quietly, "even knowing how it ended. Those were the happiest years of my life." Nathan's expression softened. "Mine too, which is probably pathetic, considering how it all turned out." "It's not pathetic." Claudia reached across the table, almost touching his hand before stopping herself. "What we had was real. The business, the dreams, the way we fit together, all of that was real. Was it?" Nathan pulled his hands back, wrapping them around his coffee mug again. Or was it just two scared kids playing house while they tried to build something they didn't really understand? The question stung because there was truth in it. They had been young, barely 22, when they'd started the company, convinced that love and shared ambition were enough to overcome any obstacle. They'd incorporated Neuralink technologies straight out of college, working from Nathan's tiny apartment because Claudia's place was even smaller. Those early days had been a blur of ramen dinners and 16-hour coding sessions, of celebrations over minor victories and passionate arguments about technical approaches that usually ended with them in bed, working out their differences in the language of touch and whispered promises. "We were naive," Claudia admitted, "but we weren't wrong about the technology. The pattern recognition algorithms we developed, the data analysis tools, They were years ahead of anything else on the market. Your data analysis tools, Nathan. Corrected. I seem to remember losing any claim to intellectual property when I abandoned the company. There was something in his tone that made Claudia look at him more carefully. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of careful neutrality that suggested he knew more about her success than he'd let on. Nathan, what exactly do you know about Nexus Technologies? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the Formica table. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. I know that your flagship product is a data analytics platform that helps companies optimize their operations by identifying inefficiencies in real time. I know that the core algorithms bear a striking resemblance to the pattern recognition systems we developed together. And I know that according to the patent filings, the intellectual property belongs entirely to you. Claudia's blood turned to ice. You've seen the patents? Public records, Claudia. Available to anyone who knows where to look. Nathan's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Even homeless people have access to library computers. The casual way he delivered the information was somehow more devastating than if he'd screamed accusations at her. Claudia felt the careful justification she'd built over the years begin to crumble. She'd told herself that the core innovations had been hers, that Nathan's contributions had been minimal, that she'd had every right to move forward with their work after he'd abandoned the company. But sitting across from him now, seeing the quiet dignity with which he faced his circumstances, she couldn't escape the truth that she'd been avoiding for 7 years. Nathan, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything. He signaled Elena for more coffee, his movements deliberate and controlled. You saw an opportunity, and you took it. That's what successful people do. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Nathan accepted the coffee refill with a nod of thanks to Elena. You had a choice between loyalty to someone who was falling apart and loyalty to your own future. You chose your future. I understand that choice. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do anymore. The words came out in a rush, surprising them both. I tell myself that I did what I had to do, that you were too sick to be a reliable partner, that I couldn't risk everything on someone who might have another breakdown. But the truth is, I was scared. Nathan waited, not helping her with the confession she'd never made to anyone, including herself. I was terrified that if I stayed, if I tried to help you through it, I'd end up trapped, stuck in a life that was smaller than what I wanted, caring for someone who might never get better. Claudia's voice cracked. So I ran. I took the easy way out and I ran, and I've been running ever since. The silence that followed felt like judgment, though Nathan's expression remained neutral. Elena refilled Claudia's cup without being asked, her movements gentle in a way that suggested she'd overheard more than she was letting on. You want to know what the worst part is? Nathan said finally. I don't even blame you for leaving. If I'd been in your position, watching someone I loved fall apart like that, I might have made the same choice. His understanding was somehow worse than anger would have been. Claudia found herself wishing he would yell at her, accuse her of being selfish and heartless, give her something concrete to defend against instead of this terrible compassion that left her nowhere to hide. But I do blame you for one thing, he continued, and his voice carried a weight that made her look up sharply. I blame you for not fighting for us, for not even trying to see if there was a way through it together. Nathan reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made Claudia's breath catch, a small device about the size of a smartphone. Its plastic casing cracked and held together with electrical tape. She recognized it immediately, even in its broken state. You kept it, she whispered. Hard to throw away 3 years of work. Nathan placed the prototype on the table between them, handling it with the care of someone touching a relic. Remember this? How could she forget? It was their first functional prototype, the device that had launched 1,000 dreams and just as many arguments. They'd called it the Neural Interface Optimizer, a portable unit that could analyze data patterns in real time and suggest efficiency improvements for any system it was connected to. We were going to change everything with this, Claudia said, her fingers hovering over the cracked plastic without quite touching it. We were going to change everything with a lot of things. Nathan's voice carried the weight of abandoned dreams. The NIO was just the beginning. Remember the healthcare applications we mapped out? The environmental monitoring systems? The educational software that could adapt to individual learning patterns? Claudia closed her eyes, memories flooding. Back of late nights spent sketching out possibilities on whiteboards, their shared excitement making sleep seem irrelevant. They'd seen their technology as more than just a product. It was going to be a tool for solving real problems, for making the world more efficient and therefore more humane. What happened to us, Nathan? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. We used to be so sure about everything. We had plans, goals, a vision for the future. When did it all fall apart? Nathan picked up the prototype, turning it over in his hands like a worry stone. I think it started falling apart the moment we tried to turn our shared dream into a business. Dreams are beautiful because they don't have to deal with investors and market forces and quarterly projections. The minute we incorporated Neuralink, we stopped being dreamers and became entrepreneurs. But that was always the plan. We knew we'd have to commercialize the technology if we wanted to reach people. Was it the plan? Or was it what we thought we were supposed to want? Nathan set the device down again, his eyes meeting hers. I remember the exact moment I knew we were in trouble. It was that meeting with the venture capital firm Morrison, Black & Associates. You remember it? Claudia nodded. She remembered everything about that meeting, their first real pitch to serious investors, the moment when their college project had the potential to become something much larger. The lead partner, what was his name? Davidson. Marcus Davidson. Right. Davidson looked at our prototype, listened to our presentation about helping people optimize their lives and work more efficiently. And the first thing he said was, how? Do we scale this to enterprise clients? How do we build recurring revenue streams? How do we create vendor lock-in? Claudia remembered the excitement she'd felt at those questions. Finally, someone who understood the business potential of what they'd built. But she could see now, through Nathan's eyes, how different that conversation must have looked to him. You lit up when he started talking about market strategy, Nathan continued. I could see you mentally redesigning everything we built to fit his vision of what would sell. And I realized that I'd been thinking about our technology as something beautiful that happened to have commercial potential, while you've been thinking about it as a commercial product that happened to be beautiful. That's not fair, isn't it? Nathan's voice remained gentle, but his words cut deep. Tell me honestly, Claudia, when you're in board meetings now, presenting your quarterly results, how often do you think about the dreams we used to share? How often do you remember that we wanted to build technology that would help teachers reach struggling students, or help doctors catch diseases earlier, or help families reconnect with each other? The silence stretched between them because they both knew the answer. Claudia couldn't remember the last time she'd thought about anything beyond market share and profit margins. Success had its own momentum, its own demands, and somewhere along the way she'd stopped asking whether she was building something meaningful and started focusing solely on building something profitable. We were different people then, she said finally. Younger? More idealistic. Were we different? Or did we just make different choices? Nathan leaned forward, his intensity reminding her of the passionate student she'd fallen in love with. Because I look at what you've built with Nexus, and I can see our old dreams buried in there. The pattern recognition, the efficiency optimization, the real-time analysis. It's all there. You just pointed it in a different direction. A more practical direction. A more profitable direction. Nathan picked up his coffee, but didn't drink it. and maybe that's fine. Maybe the world needs practical solutions more than it needs beautiful dreams. But I keep wondering what would have happened if we'd found a way to keep both. Claudia felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of defenses she'd held for so long that they'd become part of her identity. You're talking about the breakdown. Like it was just a business disagreement. Nathan, you were sick. Really sick. You weren't sleeping. You weren't eating regularly. You were convinced that our investors were part of some conspiracy. I was manic. And then I was psychotic. And then I was hospitalized. Nathan's voice was steady, clinical. But before all of that, I was just someone who couldn't reconcile what we were building with what we were being asked to build. The stress of that conflict, the pressure to choose between our vision and market demands, that's what triggered my first major episode. The words hit Claudia like a physical blow. She'd never connected Nathan's mental health crisis with the business pressure they'd been under, had never considered that the thing she'd embraced, the transition from dreamers to entrepreneurs, might have been the thing that broke him. You're saying I pushed you toward a breakdown? I'm saying we both got caught in a system that doesn't have room for the kind of partnership we thought we wanted. Nathan finally took a sip of his coffee, grimacing slightly at the taste. Venture, capital, corporate structure, market competition, it's all designed to reward individual achievement and punish collaborative decision-making. We were trying to build something together in a world that only recognizes single points of success and failure. But other couples have built businesses together. Other partnerships have worked. Have they? Or have they just learned to hide? The casualties better? Nathan gestured toward the window, where the city lights reflected off wet streets. How many tech entrepreneurs do you know who are genuinely happy? How many successful CEOs have relationships that survived their climb to the top? How many people like us, people who started with big dreams and good intentions, ended up trading everything meaningful for something profitable? Claudia thought about her own life, the empty penthouse, the careful distance she maintained from everyone around her, the way she'd trained herself to see emotional connections as potential liabilities. She thought about her peers in the tech industry, people who'd achieved everything they'd thought they wanted and seemed just as isolated and driven as she was. So what was the alternative? She asked. Stay small? Keep the company as a hobby? Never try to reach the people we wanted to help? I don't know. Nathan's honesty was both refreshing and frustrating. Maybe there wasn't an alternative. Maybe we were doomed from the moment we decided we wanted to change the world and make money doing it. But I still think we could have tried harder to find a third option. What would that have looked like? Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something beyond the diner's walls. When he spoke, his voice carried a wistfulness that made Claudia's chest ache. Maybe it would have looked like taking investor money, but keeping control of our mission. Maybe it would have looked like growing slowly instead of trying to scale quickly. Maybe it would have looked like you staying with me through the breakdown, instead of running towards safer ground. He met her eyes again. Maybe it would have looked like failure by conventional standards, but success by the standards we used to care about. Elena appeared at their table again, this time with a subtle urgency that caught Claudia's attention. Nathan, honey, I hate to interrupt, but Marcus is here. He's asking for you. Claudia looked toward the entrance and saw a man in his 50s, wearing military surplus clothing and carrying himself with the ramrod posture of someone who'd served. His face was weathered, marked by lines that spoke of both hardship and resilience, and his eyes swept the diner with the automatic vigilance of someone who'd learned to assess threats quickly. Everything okay? Nathan asked, already sliding out of the booth. He says there's been some trouble at the camp. Police sweep about an hour ago. Some folks got arrested, others scattered. Elena's voice was low, meant only for their table. He's trying to account for everyone. Nathan stood immediately, his concern evident. Marcus, what happened? The older man approached their table, his gaze taking in Claudia's expensive clothes with the kind of quick assessment that missed nothing. 3 cars showed up at the encampment under the bridge. Said they had complaints about public health violations and drug activity. Rounded up 8 people, including Sarah and her kids. Sarah's kids are in the system? Nathan's voice carried a pain that made Claudia's stomach clench. Clearly, these weren't abstract problems to him. These were people he cared about. Probably. You know how it goes. They'll be in foster care by morning, and Sarah will spend 6 months trying to get them back, assuming she can make bail. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but Claudia could hear the anger underneath. Tommy's asking if you know somewhere else we can set up for a few nights. Somewhere the patrols don't usually check. Nathan ran a hand to his hair, thinking, there's that spot behind the old warehouse on 5th. Not great, but it's hidden and dry. Tell Tommy I'll meet him there in an hour. Marcus nodded and started to leave, then paused. You sure you're good here? Don't want to leave you somewhere unsafe. The protective concern in his voice surprised Claudia. She realized that Nathan had built a community, a chosen family of sorts. People who watched out for each other in ways that her corporate colleagues never did. I'm fine, Marcus. This is Claudia. I told you about her. We're just talking. Marcus's expression shifted, and Claudia saw recognition dawn in his eyes. The business partner. There was no hostility in his voice, but there was a careful neutrality. That suggested Nathan had shared at least some of their history. Former business partner. Claudia corrected automatically, then felt foolish for the distinction. Right. Marcus studied her for another moment, then turned back to Nathan. 1 hour? I'll be there. After Marcus left, Nathan sat back down, but his attention was clearly divided. The easy intimacy of their conversation had been interrupted by reality, the reality of Nathan's current life and the responsibilities that came with it. You have to go, Claudia said, and it wasn't a question. Yeah, when people get displaced like this, it's important to regroup quickly. Find shelter, make sure everyone's accounted for. Figure out what resources we need. Nathan's voice carried the authority of someone who'd taken on leadership responsibilities, despite having nothing material to offer his community. Sarah's children, how old are they? 8 and 10. Sweet kids. They've been living in the car with their mom since her husband left. Sarah's been trying to get into transitional housing, but the waiting lists are months long. Nathan's expression was grim. Those kids were doing okay, considering. They were still going to school, still had some stability. Now they'll be bounced around the foster system while Sarah tries to prove she's fit to care for them. The casual way he described such devastating circumstances reminded Claudia of how insulated her own life had become. When she thought about homelessness, if she thought about it at all, it was as an abstract social problem that other people dealt with. She'd never considered the human cost of policy decisions, the way a simple police sweep could destroy families and scatter communities. Is there anything? She stopped, unsure how to phrase the question without sounding patronizing. Is there anything I could do to help? Nathan looked at her carefully. Help how? I don't know. Bail money? Legal fees? Something? Sarah doesn't need charity, Claudia. She needs a system that doesn't criminalize poverty. She needs affordable housing and accessible mental health care and job training programs that actually lead to employment. Nathan's voice wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of someone who'd thought deeply about these issues. Throwing money at individual cases doesn't solve the underlying problems, but it might help Sarah get her kids back. This time. What about next time? What about the hundreds of other families in the same situation? Nathan leaned forward, his passion for the subject evident. You want to help? Use your success to advocate for policy changes. Fund programs that address root causes instead of just treating symptoms. Build technology that serves people who don't have venture capital backing. The challenge in his voice was clear, and Claudia felt herself responding to it despite her discomfort. You're talking about completely rethinking my business model. I'm talking about remembering why we wanted to build technology in the first place. Nathan glanced toward the door, clearly torn between continuing their conversation and meeting his responsibilities to his community. We used to believe that innovation should serve humanity, not just generate profit. What happened to that belief? It ran up against reality. Markets, investors, competition, excuses. Nathan's interruption was gentle but firm. I'm not saying it would have been easy to maintain our ideals while building a successful company, but I am saying you made choices, and those choices led you away from the things we used to care about. Claudia felt a flash of defensive anger. And what choices led you to living on the streets? What choices led to 5 years of homelessness? The question came out harsher than she'd intended, and she immediately regretted it. But Nathan didn't flinch. The choice to prioritize my mental health over financial stability. The choice to walk away from a system that was making me sick instead of finding a way to succeed within it. The choice to build relationships with people who value who I am rather than what I can produce. His voice remained calm, but Claudia could see that her words had hit their mark. You're right that some of those choices led to consequences I didn't anticipate, but at least I can live with the person those choices made me into. The implication hung between them like a challenge. Could Claudia live with the person her choices had made her into? When she stripped away the corporate success and financial security, what was left? I should let you go, she said quietly. Your friends need you. Nathan nodded but didn't immediately stand. This conversation is not finished, is it? I don't know. Should it be? That depends. Nathan picked up the broken prototype again, turning it over in his hands. Are you asking because you want to feel better about the past? Or because you're genuinely interested in understanding who I am now? It was a fair question, and Claudia wasn't sure she knew the answer. Her initial impulse had been driven by guilt and curiosity, a desire to ease her conscience and satisfy her wonder about what had happened to the man she'd once loved. But sitting across from him, hearing him talk about his community and his values and his complicated relationship with the choices they'd both made, she found herself genuinely interested in knowing this version of Nathan. I think I'd like to understand who you are now, she said. If you're willing to share that. Nathan studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether her interest was genuine. Finally, he stood and pulled a worn business card from his wallet. Not his own card, but one for a community advocacy organization. There's a number on the back, he said, flipping the card over to show handwritten digits. It's the phone at it. The community center where I volunteer sometimes. If you really want to understand my life now, call that number tomorrow evening around 6. Ask for Nathan. If I'm there, maybe we can continue this conversation. If I'm not, he shrugged. Then, maybe that's your answer about whether this is worth pursuing. Claudia took the card, noting how carefully he'd avoided giving her direct access to him. He was protecting himself, setting boundaries that allowed him to choose whether and how to engage with her. Nathan, she called as he headed toward the door. Thank you for talking to me tonight. For not. She struggled to find the right words. For not making this harder than it had to be. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Take care of yourself, Claudia, and think about what I said. About building something that serves people instead of just serving success. After he left, Claudia sat alone in the diner, turning the business card over in her hands. Elena approached, with a coffee pot, refilling her cup without being asked. He's a good man, Elena said quietly. Been coming here for 3 years. Never once caused trouble. Always treats everyone with respect. Takes care of people who need taking care of. How much do you know about his situation? Enough to know he's got a story, and enough to know it's not my business unless he wants to share it. Elena's tone carried a gentle warning. But I will say this, whatever happened between you two, it left him with some deep hurts. You be careful about opening old wounds unless you're prepared to help them heal properly. Claudia nodded, understanding the message. Elena was protecting Nathan, just as Marcus had been, just as his whole community seemed to do for each other. It was a level of care and mutual support that was foreign to Claudia's world of professional relationships and carefully maintained boundaries. She paid for their food and coffee, leaving a generous tip that Elena accepted with a nod of thanks, but no special acknowledgement. As she walked back toward the subway station, Claudia found herself thinking about the questions Nathan had raised about success and values, about the choices that had led them both to this moment, about whether it was possible to build something meaningful in a world that seemed designed to reward only profit and individual achievement. The rain had started again, turning the city streets into a kaleidoscope of reflected light. As Claudia descended into the subway station where this whole encounter had begun, she realized that her carefully ordered life had just become much more complicated. Claudia spent the next day in meetings, but her mind kept drifting to Nathan's words and the business card tucked in her wallet. Every corporate presentation felt hollow, every discussion of market penetration and revenue growth seeming to echo his question, what happened to building something that serves people? By 5:30, she found herself walking toward the community center whose address was printed on the card. She told herself she was just curious, that she wanted to see where Nathan volunteered, but the truth was more complicated. Something about their conversation had shaken loose a part of herself she'd buried years ago. The idealistic young woman who'd believed technology could make the world better. The Riverside Community Center was housed in a converted warehouse, its brick exterior marked by cheerful murals and a sign advertising services from job training to childcare. Through the windows, Claudia could see people of all ages moving around inside, children doing homework at long tables, adults clustered around computers, elderly residents playing cards in a corner near the windows. She called the number from her car, her hand surprisingly unsteady as she dialed. Riverside Community Center. This is Beth. Hi, I'm looking for Nathan Morrison. Is he there this evening? Hold on, let me check. Claudia heard muffled voices, the sound of someone calling Nathan's name. After a few moments, his familiar voice came on the line. Claudia? I hope it's okay that I called. You said, I know. What I said. I'm actually surprised you followed through. There was something in his voice she couldn't identify, wariness, maybe, or resignation. Are you nearby? I'm outside, actually. In the parking lot. A long pause. Come in. Ask for Beth at the front desk. Tell her you're here to see me. I'll meet you in a few minutes. The interior of the community center was warm and busy, filled with the kind of purposeful activity that reminded Claudia of her grandmother's bakery. Beth, a woman in her 40s with graying temples and kind eyes, directed her to a seating area near the children's section. Nathan appeared after a few minutes, wearing clean jeans and a volunteer t-shirt that made him look more like the person she remembered. He'd clearly had access to a shower and laundry facilities, and seeing him in this context as a valued community member rather than a man being assaulted on the street shifted something in her perception. You came, he said, settling into the chair across from her. You sound surprised. I wasn't sure if curiosity would win out over convenience. Nathan gestured around them. This isn't exactly your usual environment. Claudia looked around the center, taking in the mix of people using various services. It's nice, busy. It serves about 300 families in the area. Job training, computer classes, after-school programs, counseling services. Everything people need to build stable lives, all in one place. There was pride in Nathan's voice. I help with the computer literacy classes mostly. Turns out all those years of coding translate pretty well to teaching people basic digital skills. Claudia paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound condescending. That's wonderful. Really. It must be fulfilling work. It is. More fulfilling than anything I did in the corporate world, honestly. Nathan leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. But you didn't come here to admire the community center. What's on your mind? Claudia had rehearsed this conversation. During the drive over, but sitting here with Nathan, surrounded by the evidence of his commitment to service, her prepared words felt inadequate. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about building technology that serves people instead of just generating profit. She took a breath. I've been wondering if there might be a way to bridge those two things, purpose and success. That depends on how you define success. Nathan's tone was neutral, but she could see the interest in his eyes. What did you have in mind? I'm not sure yet. But I keep thinking about our old dreams, about the applications we used to imagine for pattern recognition technology. Healthcare, education, social services, all the areas where efficiency improvements could actually help people instead of just helping companies make more money. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. And you think there's a way to pursue those applications while maintaining the kind of business model that your investors expect? I don't know, maybe. But I'd like to find out. Claudia leaned forward, feeling more animated than she had in years. What if we could use Nexus's resources to develop tools specifically for nonprofit organizations, or create a division focused on social impact projects? We? Nathan's eyebrows rose. That's an interesting choice of pronoun, considering I'm not part of your company. The comment stopped Claudia cold. In her enthusiasm, she'd unconsciously fallen back into the collaborative language of their old partnership, forgetting that Nathan had no reason to trust her business judgment or her commitment to following through on idealistic promises. You're right. I'm sorry. I got carried away. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I guess I was imagining what it might be like to work together again, even though I have no right to assume you'd be interested in that. I didn't say I wasn't interested. I just want to make sure we're being realistic about what collaboration would look like. Nathan glanced around the community center, then back to her. Because if this is about easing your conscience or making yourself feel better about the past, then we should stop this conversation right now. It's not about my conscience. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Or maybe it is, partly. But it's also about the fact that I've built something successful and empty, and you found something meaningful but unsustainable. And maybe there's a way to combine those things into something better. Nathan studied her face for a long moment. What makes you think my life is unsustainable? Nathan, you're homeless. You're living day to day, dependent on shelters and charity. I'm housed inconsistently, he corrected. But I'm not dependent. I work when I can. I contribute to my community. I have relationships with people who value me for who I am rather than what I own. That's more sustainability than a lot of people with regular addresses can claim. His calm correction made Claudia realize how many assumptions she'd been making about his situation. She'd been thinking about sustainability in purely economic terms, forgetting that there were other ways to measure a life's value. You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to diminish what you've built here. But you're also not wrong that housing insecurity creates limitations. Nathan's voice softened slightly. There are things I'd like to do, projects I'd like to pursue, that require more stability than I currently have. The question is whether there's a way to address those limitations without compromising the things I value about my current life. What do you value most? Authenticity, community, the knowledge that my work directly helps real people with real problems. Nathan gestured toward the computer lab, where an elderly man was carefully pecking at a keyboard while a teenage volunteer offered encouragement. When I teach someone to use email so they can stay in touch with their grandchildren, or help someone apply for jobs online, I can see the immediate impact of what I'm doing. That's something I never had in the corporate world. Claudia followed. His gaze watching the interaction between the elderly man and his young teacher. There was patience there, kindness, a level of human connection that was entirely absent from her sleek corporate offices. What if there was a way to scale that? Impact? She asked carefully. What if instead of helping one person at a time, we could build tools that helped hundreds of community centers serve thousands of people more effectively? We're back to we again. Nathan. Claudia turned to face him fully. I'm going to be completely honest with you because I think you deserve that. I built my company using technologies we developed together. I filed patents that should have included your name. I benefited financially from work we did as partners, and you got nothing. Nathan's expression didn't change, but she saw something shift in his eyes, surprise. Maybe that she was acknowledging the truth so directly. I told myself at the time that it was justified because you'd abandoned the company, because you were too sick to be a reliable partner, because I was the one taking all the risks. But the truth is, I took advantage of your crisis to build something for myself, and I've been carrying the guilt of that choice ever since. So this is about your conscience, partly. But it's also about the fact that I think you're brilliant, and I think the work you're doing here matters. And I think there might be a way to combine your understanding of what people actually need with my resources and business experience to build something genuinely useful. Nathan was quiet for a long time, his eyes focused on something beyond the windows. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. What exactly are you proposing? Claudia took a breath, knowing that what she said next would determine whether this conversation continued or ended permanently. I'm proposing that we start over. Not romantically, I understand that ship has sailed, but professionally, as partners. She paused, gathering her courage. I'm proposing that I formally recognize your contributions to Nexus's core technologies by making you a co-founder and giving you an equity stake that reflects your actual contributions. And then I'm proposing that we use that foundation to build something that serves communities like this one. The silence that followed felt endless. Claudia watched Nathan's face, trying to read his reaction, but his expression remained carefully neutral. Finally, he spoke. You're talking about fundamentally changing your business model. Your investors won't be happy about that. Some of them won't. But I think there are others who would be interested in a company that demonstrates that social impact and financial success aren't mutually exclusive. Claudia felt her excitement building again. The market for social impact technology is huge and underserved. There's real money to be made in building tools that help nonprofits, government agencies, and community organizations work more effectively. And if the money doesn't materialize, if your investors pull out, if the social impact market turns out to be smaller than you think, then we'll have tried something meaningful instead of just profitable. Claudia surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. And honestly, at this point in my life, that feels like a better risk than continuing to build something I don't actually care about. Nathan studied her face for what felt like an eternity. Around them, the community center hummed with activity, children laughing in the after-school program, adults discussing job prospects in the career counseling area, seniors sharing stories over games of chess. I need to think about this, he said finally. It's a big decision, and I don't make big decisions quickly anymore. Of course, take all the time you need, and I have conditions. If we do this, if we actually move forward with some kind of partnership, it has to be real. Equal decision-making authority, equal recognition, equal responsibility. Not you being generous to the homeless guy you used to know. I wouldn't want it any other way. Nathan nodded slowly. I'll give you an answer in a week. That enough time for you to think about whether you really mean what you're saying. More than enough. Claudia stood, extending her hand. Thank you for considering it, for giving me a chance to try to make things right. Nathan shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. Don't try to make things right, Claudia. Try to make things better. The past is the past. What matters now is what we choose to build next. The week that followed was the longest of Claudia's professional life. She found herself questioning everything: her business model, her relationships with investors, her definition of success, even the person she'd become in pursuit of corporate achievement. Every board meeting felt like performance art. Every strategic planning session like an exercise in futility. On Wednesday morning, Maya knocked on her office door with an expression that immediately put Claudia on alert. Her assistant was holding a manila envelope and wearing the kind of carefully neutral expression that usually preceded bad news. "Maya, what's wrong? I need to give you this." Maya placed the envelope on Claudia's desk with unusual formality. "It's my resignation letter." The words hit Claudia like cold water. Maya had been with her for 3 years, had become the closest thing to a friend that Claudia allowed herself in the corporate world. More than that, Maya was competent, discreet, and absolutely essential to the smooth functioning of Claudia's complicated schedule. "Maya, if this is about salary or benefits, we can discuss. It's not about money." Maya's voice was quiet but firm. "It's about ethics, and about the fact that I can't continue to be complicit in what this company has become." Claudia opened the envelope with shaking hands, scanning the formally worded resignation letter. But it was the handwritten note attached that made her blood run cold. "Claudia," it read, "I've known about the patent issues for over a year. I've known about Nathan Morrison and what happened to him. I've known about the other ethical shortcuts you've taken to maintain your competitive advantage. I kept quiet because I believed you were a good person who had made some questionable choices. But I can't keep making excuses for behavior that contradicts every value I was raised to believe in. I hope you find a way to make things right, but I can't be part of this anymore. Maya, how long have you known?" Claudia's voice was barely a whisper. "Since I did the background research for the Robert Chun meeting. When investors start asking about former partners, I make sure I have all the facts." "What I found?" Maya shook her head. "Claudia, Nathan Morrison was listed as co-inventor on the provisional patents you filed together. His name was removed from the final applications without any documentation of his consent or compensation." The room felt like it was spinning. Claudia had convinced herself that the patent modifications were a gray area, a technicality that reflected the reality of who had actually developed the final commercial versions of their technology. But seeing it laid out in Maya's careful documentation, she couldn't escape the truth. She had stolen Nathan's intellectual property. "There's more," Maya continued, her voice gentle but relentless. "The algorithm that drives your flagship product is virtually identical to code Nathan wrote for your original startup. I found his contributions in the version control system detailed. Innovative work that forms the foundation of everything Nexus has built since. Maya, I also found records of his attempts to contact you after his hospitalization. Voice messages, emails, even a letter sent to your office address. All ignored or deleted without response." Maya's professional composure finally cracked slightly. "Claudia, he tried to reach out to you for months. He wasn't asking for money or making demands. He just wanted to understand what had happened to their partnership." Each revelation felt like a physical blow. Claudia had constructed an elaborate justification for her actions over the years, but Maya's calm recitation of facts stripped away every excuse she'd built. "Why didn't you say anything before now?" Claudia asked. "Because I hoped you would figure it out yourself. I hoped that success would eventually feel hollow enough that you'd want to address the foundation it was built on." Maya's voice carried disappointment rather than anger. "But when you started talking about new partnerships and social impact initiatives last week, I realized you were planning to build something new on the same compromised foundation. I can't be part of that." Claudia sank into her desk chair, feeling the weight of 7 years' worth of accumulated guilt and denial. What do you think I should do? I think you should call Nathan Morrison and tell him the truth. All of it. Not because you want something from him, but because he deserves to know what happened to the work he poured his heart into. Maya picked up her purse, preparing to leave. And I think you should decide whether you want to be the kind of person who builds success on other people's stolen dreams, or the kind of person who finds a way to create value honestly. After Maya left, Claudia sat alone in her office for the first time in years without the buffer of constant meetings and phone calls. The silence was deafening, filled with the echo of Maya's words and the growing realization that her entire professional identity was built on a foundation of betrayal. She pulled out Nathan's business card and stared at it for a long time. Then picked up her phone and dialed Robert Chun's number. Robert? It's Claudia Raines. I need to schedule a meeting with you and the other board members. There are some things about the company's history that you need to know before we move forward with the next funding round. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of her professional life. Robert listened without interruption. As she explained the intellectual property issues, Nathan's contributions to the core technology, and her own role in obscuring his involvement. When she finished, the silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. Claudia, Robert said finally, are you telling me that your entire platform is built on stolen technology? I'm telling you that I failed to properly credit and compensate a co-inventor, and that I need to make that right before we proceed with any new business initiatives. The legal implications alone, if Morrison decides to sue for damages, he could claim ownership of a significant portion of the company's value. This changes everything about our investment position. I understand that. But I also think there's an opportunity here to demonstrate that we can build a sustainable business model based on ethical practices rather than competitive advantages gained through questionable means. Robert's laugh was short and bitter. Claudia, you're talking about fundamentally undermining the basis of our investment. Why would we support a plan that reduces the company's value and increases its legal liability? Because the alternative is continuing to build on a foundation that could collapse at any moment if Nathan decides to pursue legal action. At least this way, we control the narrative and potentially gain a partner whose insights could help us develop new revenue streams. The call ended with Robert promising to discuss the situation with the other investors, but his tone suggested that their support was far from guaranteed. Claudia spent the rest of the day fielding similar conversations with key stakeholders, each one more discouraging than the last. By Thursday afternoon, the reality of her situation had become clear. Coming clean about Nathan's contributions would likely cost her the support of her current investors and potentially expose the company to significant legal liability. But continuing to build on stolen intellectual property felt increasingly impossible. She found herself walking the streets of Seattle after work, retracing the route she'd taken with Nathan from the subway station to Elena's diner. The city looked different now, not like a conquest she'd achieved, but like a place where real people lived real lives that her decisions could impact. At the community center, she asked for Beth and inquired whether Nathan was volunteering that evening. He's in the computer lab, Beth said, studying Claudia's face with the kind of perceptive attention that suggested Nathan had shared at least some of their history. But he asked me to tell you, if you came by, that he's not ready to give you an answer yet. That's okay. I actually came to ask him something different. Claudia paused, gathering her courage. Could you tell him that I'd like to speak with him about the patents? Tell him I think he deserves to know the whole truth about what happened after he left the company. Beth's expression shifted slightly. I'll give him the message. Whether he wants to see you is up to him. Claudia waited in the lobby for 20 minutes before Nathan appeared, his expression guarded but not hostile. Beth said he wanted to talk about patents. I wanted to tell you what I should have told you 7 years ago. Claudia's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. About what I did with our shared work after you were hospitalized. Nathan studied her face for a moment, then nodded toward a quiet corner where they could talk privately. They sat in mismatched chairs near a bulletin board covered with community announcements and children's artwork. "My assistant resigned yesterday," Claudia began. She'd done research into the company's history, and she found things that I'd hoped would stay buried. About the patents, about your attempts to contact me, about the foundation that Nexus was built on. Nathan waited, his expression giving nothing away. "I removed your name from the patent applications, Nathan. The algorithms that drive my most successful products are based on code you wrote, innovations you developed, ideas we created together. I built my entire company on intellectual property that legally and ethically belongs to both of us, and I never compensated you or even acknowledged your contributions." The words came out in a rush, each admission feeling like a weight being lifted from her chest, and simultaneously like a nail being driven into her professional coffin. "I told myself it was justified because you'd left the company, because you were too sick to be a reliable partner, because I was taking all the business risks. But the truth is, I was scared and selfish, and I took advantage of your crisis to build something for myself." Nathan was quiet for a long time, his eyes focused on his hands. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "How much of the company's value is based on that stolen intellectual property? Most of it? Maybe all of it?" Claudia felt tears threatening for the first time in the conversation. "Nathan, I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate, but I am genuinely, deeply sorry for what I did to you. What are you planning to do about it?" The question was asked calmly, without accusation, but it carried the weight of 7 years' worth of consequences. "I don't know yet. My investors are furious. My board wants to minimize legal liability rather than address the ethical issues. But I can't keep building on this foundation, knowing what I know now." Nathan nodded slowly. "And if I wanted to pursue legal action? If I wanted to claim my rightful share of the company's value?" Claudia's stomach clenched, but she met his eyes steadily. "Then I would support that claim. You have every right to compensation for what I took from you." They sat in silence for several minutes, surrounded by the warm chaos of the community center. Children's laughter echoed from the after-school program. Adults discussed job prospects in quiet corners, and volunteers moved purposefully between different service areas. Finally, Nathan spoke. "I have a counterproposal." Claudia's heart stopped. "A counterproposal?" Nathan leaned forward, his expression serious but not hostile. "I could hire a lawyer, file suit for intellectual property theft, and probably walk away with a significant portion of your company's value. That would be the conventional response to what you've just admitted. Yes, it would. But that would destroy everything you've built, put dozens of people out of work, and ultimately benefit no one except lawyers and potentially me." Nathan paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm more interested in building something new than in tearing down something that already exists." Claudia felt a flicker of hope mixed with deep wariness. What kind of something new? "Here's what I propose." Nathan's voice took on the focused intensity she remembered from their college days, when he was working through a complex problem. "You formally acknowledge my co-inventor status on all relevant patents. You restructure the company to reflect my actual contributions. I'm thinking a 35% equity stake, given that the core algorithms were genuinely collaborative work." Claudia nodded, though she could already hear her investors' objections. "But instead of me taking a traditional executive role, we create a new division focused entirely on social impact applications, community technology solutions, tools for nonprofits, software that helps organizations like this one work more effectively." Nathan gestured around the community center. "I would lead that division, with full autonomy to pursue projects that serve populations who can't afford traditional enterprise software. You're talking about essentially giving away a significant portion of the company's resources to pursue projects that might not generate revenue. I'm talking about using a portion of the company's resources to pursue projects that generate social value instead of just financial value. Some of those projects might be profitable. Others might not. But all of them would be meaningful. Claudia found herself thinking through the implications. It was exactly the kind of proposition that would horrify most venture capital firms using proven technology to serve underserved markets with limited ability to pay premium prices. But it was also the closest thing to their original vision that she'd heard in years. My investors will never support it. Then find new investors. Or find ways to demonstrate that social impact can be financially sustainable. Nathan's voice carried a challenge. You're the business genius, Claudia. If anyone can figure out how to make meaningful work profitable, it should be you. And if I can't? If the board refuses to approve this kind of restructuring? Nathan's expression grew more serious. Then I'll pursue legal action for intellectual property theft, and you'll lose everything anyway. But at least this way, if you're willing to take the risk, we might build something worth saving. The ultimatum was delivered gently, but it was an ultimatum nonetheless. Claudia felt the weight of 7 years' worth of choices pressing down on her. Every ethical shortcut, every rationalization, every moment when she'd chosen profit over principle. How long do I have to decide? As long as you need. But Claudia, Nathan's voice softened slightly. Don't make this decision based on guilt or fear. Make it based on whether you genuinely believe we can build something better together than either of us could build alone. I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Claudia took a deep breath. Do you think you could ever trust me again? As a business partner, I mean. After everything I've done? Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. I think trust is something that has to be earned over time, through consistent actions rather than promises. But I also think people can change if they're genuinely committed to changing. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. Nathan stood, preparing to return to his volunteer work. But I will say this, the fact that you came clean about the patents, knowing it could destroy everything you've built, suggests that maybe you're ready to prioritize doing the right thing over protecting yourself. After Nathan left, Claudia sat alone in the community center lobby, watching the life of the organization flow around her. She saw an elderly woman learning to video chat with her grandchildren, her face lighting up when the connection worked. She saw a teenager helping younger kids with their homework, his patience and kindness evident in every interaction. She saw adults studying for their GED exams, pursuing second chances at education that could transform their lives. This was what Nathan meant by meaningful work. This was what they used to dream about when they talked about technology serving humanity rather than just generating profit. Claudia pulled out her phone and called. Robert Chun again. Robert, it's Claudia. I've thought about our conversation yesterday, and I want to schedule a board meeting for tomorrow afternoon. I have a proposal for restructuring the company that I think you need to hear. Claudia, I hope you're not planning to double down on this social responsibility angle. The board is already concerned about the legal implications of the Morrison situation. I'm planning to present a business case for how we can address the legal issues while positioning the company for long-term growth in underserved markets. Claudia's voice was steadier than she felt. Give me 2 hours to make my case. If the board doesn't see the value in what I'm proposing, I'll step down as CEO, and you can find someone who's willing to continue building on the current foundation. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Robert was clearly calculating the risks of supporting her versus the risks of losing her entirely. 2 hours, he said finally. But Claudia, you better have solid financial projections to support whatever you're planning to propose. Good intentions don't pay dividends. I understand. I'll have everything ready. Claudia hung up and immediately called the one person she knew who might be able to help her make a compelling business case for social impact technology. Maya, I know you resigned, but I need your help with something. I'm trying to put together a presentation that shows how social impact applications can be financially sustainable. Do you have any contacts in the nonprofit technology space who might be willing to talk to me about market opportunities? Maya was quiet for a moment. Are you serious about this, Claudia? Or is this just another corporate strategy to manage a PR problem? I'm serious. More serious than I've been about anything in years. Claudia looked around the community center, watching the volunteers and clients working together to solve real problems. I want to find a way to build something that serves people like this instead of just serving profit margins. Okay, Maya said slowly. I'll make some calls. But Claudia, if you're really going to do this, if you're really going to try to change the fundamental direction of the company, you need to be prepared for the possibility that you'll lose everything you've built. I'm starting to think that might not be such a bad thing. The next 24 hours were a blur of research, phone calls, and financial modeling. Maya, despite her resignation, connected Claudia with nonprofit technology directors, social entrepreneurs, and impact investors who helped her understand the real market opportunities in community-focused technology solutions. What she discovered surprised her. The market for affordable, effective technology tools for nonprofits and community organizations was enormous and largely underserved. Most existing solutions were either too expensive for smaller organizations or too generic to address their specific needs. There was real money to be made in building targeted tools for social service providers, educational institutions, and community development organizations to adopt by Friday afternoon. Claudia had assembled a presentation that made a compelling case for social impact technology as a growth market rather than a charitable donation. She'd identified specific revenue opportunities, outlined development costs, and even secured preliminary letters of interest from several large nonprofit networks. But as she prepared to walk into the boardroom, she realized that the success or failure of her presentation mattered less than the simple fact that she was finally fighting for something she believed in rather than just something that would make her rich. The boardroom felt different when Claudia entered it that Friday afternoon. The same mahogany table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline, the same austere corporate art on the walls. But something fundamental had shifted in how she perceived the space. Instead of feeling like her domain, it felt like a stage where she was about to perform the most important scene of her professional life. Robert Chun sat at the head of the table, flanked by the other board members. Patricia Williams from the pension fund that held a significant stake in the company. David Park from the venture capital firm that had led their Series B round. And Margaret Foster, the former tech executive who served as their independent board member. Before we begin, Robert said, his tone carefully neutral, I want to make sure we all understand what we're discussing today. Claudia has informed us of some previously undisclosed intellectual property issues related to the company's founding, and she's proposing a restructuring that would address those issues while potentially changing our business model significantly. Claudia took a breath, centering herself in the way she'd learned during years of high-stakes presentations. But this time, instead of trying to tell her audience what they wanted to hear, she was going to tell them what they needed to hear. 7 years ago, I made choices that I believed were necessary to save our company, but that I now recognize were ethically wrong. Nathan Morrison, who's my co-founder and business partner, should have been credited as co-inventor on the patents that form the foundation of our current technology platform. Instead, I filed those patents in my name only, without his knowledge or consent. The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia leaned forward, her expression sharp. Are you telling us that the company's intellectual property could be subject to a legal challenge? I'm telling you that Nathan Morrison has a legitimate claim to approximately 35% of our core technology, and that I've offered to settle that claim by making him a full partner in the company. David's voice was incredulous. You've offered him a 35% equity stake? Without board approval? I've offered him recognition of his actual contributions to the company's technology, which happens to represent approximately 35% of our current value. But David, that's not the issue we should be focusing on. Claudia moved to the presentation screen, pulling up her first slide. The issue we should be focusing on is how we can use this situation as an opportunity to build something sustainable and meaningful, rather than just profitable. For the next hour, she walked them through her research on social impact technology markets. She showed them revenue projections for non-profit-focused software solutions, outlined the competitive landscape, and demonstrated how community-focused applications could generate sustainable income while serving populations that were currently underserved by existing technology companies. The total addressable market for nonprofit technology solutions is over $12 billion annually, she said, watching their faces for signs of interest. Most of that market is currently served by companies that treat nonprofits as an afterthought offering scaled down. Versions of enterprise software at prices that are still too high for smaller organizations. Margaret spoke up for the first time, but those markets are notoriously price-sensitive. How do you propose to generate the kind of margins our investors expect? By building solutions that are specifically designed for community organizations, rather than trying to adapt enterprise tools. Lower development costs, higher customer retention, and the possibility of scaling through networks of related organizations. Claudia clicked to her next slide. I've secured preliminary commitments from 3 major nonprofit networks, representing over 2,000 individual organizations. They're willing to pay subscription fees for tools that actually meet their needs, rather than settling for inadequate free alternatives. Robert was studying her financial projections with the kind of intensity she'd hoped for. These numbers assume a significant upfront investment in new product development. Where would that capital come from? From restructuring our current operations to focus on sustainable growth rather than aggressive expansion. We reduce our enterprise sales force, which is our highest cost department, and redirect those resources toward developing community-focused products. You're talking about abandoning our most profitable customer segment, David objected. I'm talking about diversifying our revenue streams to include markets that are aligned with long-term social trends toward corporate responsibility and social impact. Claudia felt her confidence building as she moved through her argument. David, the enterprise clients we serve aren't going anywhere, but they're also not growing at the rates they used to, and they're increasingly demanding that their technology partners demonstrate social responsibility credentials. She clicked to her final slide, which showed a comprehensive business model that integrated traditional enterprise services with community-focused applications. What I'm proposing is that we become the first major technology company to demonstrate that social impact and financial success aren't mutually exclusive. We continue serving our existing enterprise clients while building a parallel business focused on community technology solutions. Nathan Morrison leads the Social Impact Division. With full autonomy, while I continue managing our traditional business operations. Patricia was the first to speak after Claudia finished her presentation. It's an interesting vision, Claudia, but it's also incredibly risky. You're asking us to bet the company's future on markets that may not develop as quickly as your projections suggest. I'm asking you to bet on building something sustainable rather than something extractive. Claudia's voice carried a conviction that surprised even her. Patricia, we've built a successful company by taking other people's innovations and figuring out how to profit from them more efficiently than they could. That's not a sustainable business model in the long term. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Claudia, let me ask you directly. If we reject this proposal, what are your plans regarding the Morrison situation? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Claudia realized that this was the moment when she had to choose between protecting herself and doing what she believed was right. If you reject this proposal, I'll resign as CEO and recommend that you settle with Nathan Morrison for his rightful share of the company's value. I won't continue to build on a foundation of stolen intellectual property, even if it's legally defensible. The silence that followed was the longest of Claudia's professional life. She watched the board members exchange glances, conducting silent negotiations about her fate and the company's future. Finally, Margaret spoke. Claudia, I have to ask, is this really about business strategy? Or is this about your personal relationship with Morrison? It was a fair question, and Claudia had been asking herself the same thing for days. It started as a personal issue, but it's become something larger than that. Margaret, I spent 7 years building a company that I'm not proud of pursuing. Success that feels empty because it's built on compromising the values I used to care about. Whether or not the board supports this proposal, I can't continue down that path. Robert gathered the financial projections, studying them one more time. We need to discuss this privately. Can you give us 30 minutes? Claudia nodded and left the boardroom, her hands shaking slightly as she closed the door behind her. She'd done everything she could to make a compelling case for social impact technology as a viable business model. Now the decision was out of her hands. She walked to her office and called Nathan's number at the community center. Nathan? It's Claudia. I'm in the board meeting now. We're taking a break while they deliberate. But I wanted you to know that, regardless of what they decide, I meant what I said about recognizing your contributions to the company. How's it going? I don't know. I think I made a good case for the social impact division, but they're still processing the financial implications. Claudia looked out her office window at the city below. Nathan, can I ask you something? Of course. If this doesn't work, if the board rejects the proposal, and I end up losing the company, do you think we could try again? Start something new, built on the right foundation this time? Nathan was quiet for a moment. Claudia, are you asking? Because you think we should be business partners, or because you're scared of starting over alone? The question stopped her cold. Was she reaching out to Nathan because she genuinely believed they could build something meaningful together, or because she was looking for someone to share the risk of leaving her comfortable but compromised success behind? I think, she said slowly, I'm asking because I finally remember what it felt like to be excited about building something that mattered. And I remember that the best ideas I ever had came from working with you. That's a good answer. Before Nathan could say anything else, Maya appeared in Claudia's doorway, signaling that the board was ready to resume the meeting. I have to go, Claudia said. Wish me luck. I don't think you need luck, Claudia. I think you need courage. And it sounds like you've already found that. 6 months later, Claudia stood in the same subway station where everything had changed. But this time, she wasn't alone. Nathan was beside her, along with a dozen volunteers from the community center, setting up tablets and portable Wi-Fi hotspots for their monthly Digital Bridge Outreach Program. Double quotes. Miss Chung, can you help me with this application? An elderly man approached Claudia with a tablet, pointing to a confusing government website. My granddaughter says I can apply for benefits online, but I can't figure out how to upload my documents. Of course, Mr. Rodriguez. Let me show you. Claudia guided him through the process, her movements patient and practiced. It was work she'd never imagined herself doing 6 months ago, sitting on a folding chair in a subway station, helping people navigate bureaucratic websites and apply for social services. But it was also the most satisfying work she'd done in years. The board meeting that Friday afternoon had ended with a narrow vote of support for her restructuring proposal. Patricia and David had remained skeptical, but Robert and Margaret had been convinced by the financial projections and, perhaps more importantly, by Claudia's evident commitment to change. The transition hadn't been smooth. two of their largest. Enterprise clients had been uncomfortable with the company's new social impact focus and had moved their business elsewhere. Several employees had left when the company shifted resources away from traditional sales and marketing toward community-focused development, but other things had replaced what they'd lost. The social impact division had exceeded its first quarter revenue projections by 30%. Three major foundations had contracted with them to develop technology solutions for their grantee organizations. And perhaps most importantly, Claudia had discovered that she was good at building technology that served people who genuinely needed it. "How's the application coming?" Nathan appeared beside them, carrying coffee cups from Elena's diner in a cardboard tray. "Mr. Rodriguez just submitted his paperwork for housing assistance," Claudia said, accepting a cup gratefully. "The system actually worked the way it was supposed to. That's because we built it to work for real people instead of just checking boxes for bureaucrats," Nathan said, settling into the folding chair next to hers. Their partnership had evolved into something different from what either of them had expected. Not the romantic reunion that part of Claudia had secretly hoped for, but not the purely professional relationship she'd tried to convince herself would be sufficient either. They were friends, collaborators, and occasionally gentle critics of each other's blind spots. Nathan had moved into transitional housing within a month of their restructuring agreement, and from there into a small apartment near the community center. He'd kept his volunteer commitments and maintained his relationships with the homeless community, but having stable housing had given him the foundation to take on larger projects and longer-term planning. Claudia had moved out of her penthouse and into a smaller place in the same neighborhood where Nathan lived. She told herself it was for practical reasons shorter commute to the community center, lower cost of living, but the truth was that she'd been lonely in her tower overlooking the city and wanted to live somewhere that felt connected to the work she was doing. "Claudia?" Nathan's voice pulled her back to the present. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." He gestured toward a woman in her 30s, approaching their setup with two children in tow. Claudia recognized her immediately from Nathan's descriptions. Sarah, the mother whose family had been separated during a police sweep of the homeless encampment. "Sarah, this is Claudia, my business partner." Claudia, Sarah, and her kids, Emma and James. "Nathan's told me about the work you do," Sarah said, shaking Claudia's hand. "I wanted to thank you for the job training program. I start next week as a data entry clerk for the county health department." "That's wonderful. Nathan says you're a natural with computers. I never thought I'd be good at technology stuff, but..." Nathan was patient with me during the classes. Sarah's smile was genuine, but Claudia could see the wariness that came from years of uncertainty. "The job comes with health benefits, and it's enough to qualify for subsidized housing. We might actually have a permanent address by Christmas." After Sarah and her children moved on to work with other volunteers, Claudia found herself thinking about the chain of events that had brought them all to this moment. Her encounter with Nathan on that rainy night had felt like an ending, the final confrontation with a past she'd tried to escape. But it had turned out to be a beginning, the start of building something that served people instead of just generating profit. "You're looking thoughtful," Nathan observed, packing up his laptop as the outreach session wound down. "I was thinking about that night when I found you here. How different everything looked then." "Different how?" Claudia gestured around the subway station, which was buzzing with the activity of volunteers, helping community members with everything from job applications to healthcare enrollment. Then, this looked like a place where bad things happened to people who'd run out of options. Now it looks like a place where people come to find solutions. The place didn't change. Your perspective did. Our perspective, Claudia corrected. "I couldn't have built any of this without you." Nathan smiled, the expression warm and genuine in a way that reminded her of why she'd fallen in love with him years ago. But there was something different about it now, a depth that came from having survived real hardship and chosen compassion over bitterness. "You know what I think changed?" he said, shouldering his backpack as they prepared to head back to the office. "We stopped trying to build something impressive and started trying to build something useful." As they walked through the streets of Seattle, Claudia reflected on how much her definition of success had evolved. 6 months ago, success had meant market dominance, profit margins, and personal wealth accumulation. Now it meant Sarah getting a job that would keep her family together, Mr. Rodriguez successfully applying for housing assistance, and the gradual realization that technology could be a tool for human dignity rather than just economic efficiency. The company was smaller now, less profitable in traditional terms, but infinitely more sustainable. They'd proven that social impact technology could generate revenue while serving communities that had been ignored by mainstream tech companies. More importantly, they'd proven that business partnerships could be built on shared values rather than just shared ambitions. "Nathan," Claudia said as they reached the community center, "can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever regret it? The choice to work with me again? I mean, after everything I put you through." Nathan paused at the entrance to the community center, considering the question seriously. "I regret a lot of things about our history. I regret that we were so young and naive when we started the first company. I regret that I didn't get treatment for my mental health issues sooner. I regret that we both made choices that hurt each other." He held the door open for her, and they entered the warm, bustling space where their work had found its true purpose. "But I don't regret giving you a second chance. And I don't regret taking a second chance myself." Nathan's voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd made peace with his past and was excited about his future. "Because look what we built, Claudia. Look what happens when people decide that growth and meaning don't have to be mutually exclusive." Claudia looked around the community center, taking in the sight of people learning new skills, accessing resources, and supporting each other through challenges she was only beginning to understand. In the computer lab, elderly residents were video chatting with grandchildren. In the job training center, people were practicing interview skills and building resumes. In the children's area, kids were working on homework while their parents attended English classes. It wasn't the empire she'd once dreamed of building. It was something better, a network of relationships and resources that made people's lives genuinely better, funded by technology that served human needs rather than just generating profit. "You know what the best part is?" Claudia said, settling down at a computer to help with the evening's digital literacy class. "What's that?" "I finally built something I'm proud of. Something that won't keep me awake at night wondering what I sacrificed to get it." Nathan nodded, powering up his own workstation. Success without conscience was never really success at all. It just took us a while to figure that out. As the evening's activities began around them, Claudia felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with financial achievements or corporate recognition. She'd found her way back to the values that had drawn her to technology in the first place. The belief that innovation should serve humanity, that business could be a force for good, and that the most meaningful success came from lifting others up rather than climbing over them. Outside, the Seattle rain had started again, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected light. But inside the community center, people were building futures, one digital skill and one human connection at a time. And for the first time in 7 years, Claudia Raines knew exactly where she belonged.